This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as financial advice. All views expressed on this podcast are solely the opinions of the host and/or any guests that we might have from time to time. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or to follow a particular investing strategy.
Hello, you sexy sat stackers, and welcome to the latest episode of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast. I am Chris, and today is Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. That means a couple of things. It means that 90 years ago today, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt made it illegal for U.S. citizens to own gold. It issued that infamous Executive Order 6102, requiring all U.S. citizens to turn their gold bullion into the nearest Federal Reserve Bank or a member bank. It is also, perhaps not coincidentally, Satoshi Nakamoto's designated birthday, the birthday that he established for his pseudonym. And of course, it is Wednesday, which means it is DCA Wednesday, and it's time to grow our stack of Satoshis. Before we get into all of that, though, real quick, a look at the vital statistics. At the time of this recording, we are sitting at a block height of 784,117. And Bitcoin is ringing in at a US dollar price, a USD value of $28,110 per Bitcoin, or 3,557 sats per dollar. And that is almost exactly where we were last Wednesday. It's a couple $100 less expensive than when we began the show, but almost exactly where we were about 45 minutes later when we actually got around to doing our stack. And so we'll see where the price is by the time I get done with this episode. But currently, it's looking about the same as it was last Wednesday, which gets back to the thing I say every episode, and that is if you zoom out, Bitcoin really isn't as volatile as it is, as it appears. If you were staring at the charts relentlessly, you saw Bitcoin all over the place. It was almost 29,000 last night, and then it went down to 27,000 something and zigged and zagged. But you know, if you zoom out, if you take that longer perspective, the longer horizon perspective, Bitcoin is steadily up and to the right, and at least certainly a lot less volatile. All right, we are currently 55,883 blocks away from the next Bitcoin mining reward halving, and that looks now like it's going to be on April 20th. Nice 420. For you Elon Musk fans out there, or those of you that are amused by that particular number. That's a day earlier than the last 3 episodes in a row. Of course, a month ago, it was looking like it was going to be April 20th, and it's been steadily marching sooner and sooner. Either way, it's putting us approximately 1 year away from the next Bitcoin halving. If you know anything about Bitcoin, if you've been following this show, you know that that miner reward halving is what has at least theoretically kicked off every one of the previous bull runs, the previous cycles, the 4-year cycles. If you've noticed, Bitcoin tends to set a new all-time high, a new record high approximately every 4 years. Then it has a big quote-unquote crash. That revolves around the halving. About 6 to 18 months after the halving, Bitcoin usually peaks out at its new all-time high. Then you get that 70 to 80% retracement, which is usually still higher than whatever the previous all-time high had been. This time, there were a lot of things that were different, and we did dip below that. Well, depending where you get your data, the 2017 all-time high was less than 20,000. It was 18-ish, depending on what exchange you get your data from. And of course, Bitcoin dropped as low as like 15,800 this year, although just briefly. But in general, Bitcoin has stayed above the previous all-time high. And it was only at that $20,000, $18,000 range for a period of hours, not even a day. So the logic being, Bitcoin will set a new all-time high 6 to 18 months after the halving, which will be 6 to 18 months after approximately sometime next April. So just like last bull run, we saw the new all-time high, in November, December timeframe, both cycles. We saw Bitcoin set its 2017 high in December of 2017, and then we had a double top last time. So after the 2020 halving, we had the high in October 2021, and then in April of 2021, and then again in November. and that's when we set the all-time high of around 69,000. So in theory, November, December, sometime in the fall of 2020, we would be looking at, or 2024, we'd be looking at a new all-time high if that theory holds true. And of course, sometime after that, the next crypto bear market, the next Bitcoin winter. And of course, if Bitcoin does retrace by 80%, in theory, it wouldn't fall below 69,000 or so, afterwards. The previous all-time high is usually the new floor. So let's say it breaks it a little bit like this time, if it falls to 60,000 or even 55,000, that's still a heck of a lot higher than it is right now. So, that up and to the right trend would continues. Bitcoin marches on. All right, for those of you following such things, Bitcoin's market cap is down just a tiny bit from last week, ringing it at a market cap of 543.6 billion. It was 549 billion last Wednesday, so about little less than 6 billion difference, which is chump change when you're talking numbers over 500 billion. Of course, nowhere near that $1 trillion market cap that Bitcoin surpassed during the previous bear run. Bull run, bear run, bull market, bull run. When Bitcoin breaks, I didn't do the math, but somewhere in the $50,000 range, maybe it was $52,000 ish. We'll retake that $1 trillion market cap, and hopefully that'll happen. Right around the next halving, maybe before. There's that forecast out there that Bitcoin will hit $1 million by this June. Most people don't give that forecast a lot of credence. I think he just kind of issued that prediction for publicity, right? To get his name out there in the media. But hey, anything's possible. None of us have a crystal ball. There are a lot of things that could go wrong between now and the end of June when his 90-day time frame runs out. One of the things a lot of people haven't really mentioned recently is that debt ceiling. There have been rumblings in the last couple of days. I think Janet Yellen had hinted at doing away with the debt limit completely. Every year it seems like the Congress has to raise the debt ceiling because they're going to spend more money than they're authorized to borrow, and they're talking about just flat out doing away with it. Either way, we've already technically passed the window for the debt limit, and then the Treasury is taking their quote unquote extraordinary measures to stretch things out till June or July of this year before the government has to start defaulting on its IOUs. And there's no word on, I haven't heard if that time frame has been sped up or not by all the money that we've had to spend recently because of the way things are going with the economy. But either way, sometime between now and this summer, if they don't raise or do away with the debt limit, there could be a U.S. default, and maybe that's how we achieve $1 million Bitcoin. It isn't because Bitcoin soared, but because the U.S. dollar collapses. And that's often been, when people think, when are we going to have hyper Bitcoinization? People say, well, a rapid hyper Bitcoinization would not be a good thing because, it might look like the end of days out there. It might look like something out of Mad Max if the economy of the world has collapsed. So slow and steady is better than slow and steady up and to the right over years is better for Bitcoin, better for the world than a sudden, catastrophic hyper Bitcoinization would be. But who knows? Personally, I think the 4-year cycle is intact. I think the government can kick the can down the road a lot longer than people give them credit for. Yes, all fiat currencies eventually go to zero. All fiat currencies fail. But the government has a lot of tricks up its sleeve still. And as they say, the U.S. currency is the best looking horse at the glue factory. When we see currencies fail, it will probably be the last currency to fail because it is currently the global reserve currency. Although that's changing, with Saudi Arabia, making these agreements with countries to sell oil and things other than the dollar. That's kind of the beginning of the end for the petrodollar. If other countries fall in line and this continues, if there's no longer a need for other countries to soak up all the extra dollars that we print, well, who knows? Maybe the US dollar won't be the last one to fail. None of that matters because we're stacking Bitcoin. That's our lifeboat. That's our escape hatch. That is our safety net. All right, where were we? We just went over Bitcoin's market cap, and that's pretty much exactly where it has been the last week or so. The last 3 weeks, it's been in the mid $500 billion range. If you value your wealth in shiny metal rocks, Peter Schiff's out there taking victory laps because gold set a new all-time high, breached $2,000 an ounce. But yippee, right? So Bitcoin, gold's worth a couple dollars more than it was. If you bought Bitcoin in 2007, you bought gold in 2007, when gold was around $600 an ounce, maybe you've tripled your money. But if you bought Bitcoin 2 years later, you're up 29 million percent or 30 million percent. So nonetheless, if you do value your wealth in shiny yellow rocks, in shift bucks, it'll cost you 13.8 ounces of gold to buy just one Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin does its thing and Bitcoin retakes its previous all-time high, that's more than double what its current value is. And gold would have to be $3,600 an ounce to double, $4,000 an ounce to double where it is now. So there's obviously, gold has never had the upside, the asset appreciation that Bitcoin's displayed. Even if you don't go all the way back to when Bitcoin was first starting to trade, or when Bitcoin was $1, even if you just go back to 2017 when Bitcoin first breached $1,000 a coin, we're up 28x since 2017, and gold's up a couple $100. So I don't need to preach to the choir here. You're listening to a Bitcoin podcast, so you're probably a Bitcoin maxi or well on your way. Most certainly you're already orange pilled. But if you're not, and you value your wealth in gold, just know that right now it'll cost you 13.8 ounces of gold, almost 14 1-ounce gold coins to purchase just one Bitcoin. For those of you who value your wealth in pizza, one Bitcoin will currently score you 1,665 Papa John's pizzas. That is one Papa John's pizza for almost 4 years. That is a heck of a lot of pizza. That is, a lot of food security for just one Bitcoin. Certainly a lot more pizza than Laszlo purchased when he bought two Papa John's pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin on that very first Bitcoin pizza day. And speaking of on-chain activity, speaking of Bitcoin transactions, the mempool is, well, it's, I don't exactly want to use the word clogged, because during the 2017 bull run, there were hundreds, so like 120, 150 transactions worth of blocks worth of transactions pending in the mempool. And we've been stuck in the 60s for about a month. Currently, there are 66 blocks worth of transactions pending in the mempool. A lot of those are low priority transactions. Those ordinals, those inscriptions transactions, which most people blame for the blockchain bloat, are not prioritized because they pay lower fees. So nobody's having trouble getting their transactions on chain. Along those lines, if you do want to guarantee that your transaction is included in the next block, the fee estimator I'm looking at recommends a fee of 27 sats per byte to guarantee that. That is 3 sats cheaper than last week. Last week it would have taken 30 sats per byte to guarantee your transaction is included in the next block. The number of Satoshis per byte to guarantee that your transaction is processed within a day is exactly the same as last week at 5 sats per byte. What has changed is that now it's looking like the number of sats to guarantee that your transaction is included. Let me hold on. Let me pull this number back up, because I think I might have misquoted. So last week it would have you could have still got last week it was recommending 5 sats per byte to guarantee their transaction was processed in a day, but they were saying that 1 sat per byte transactions would still process in a week, and that has changed. Now the estimator is saying that it will take a minimum of 2 sats per byte to guarantee your transactions processed in a week. So currently it's looking like those 1 sat per byte transactions are a thing of the past. Who knows if they'll ever come back? Who knows if ordinals and inscriptions will go away, or if so many people switch to Lightning that on-chain is moot anyway. You don't know what you don't know. We don't know what the future holds. And Bitcoin transactions are still really cheap compared to how they used to be. Before SegWit, for example, during the 2017 bull run, I tried to make a transfer from my hardware wallet, and it was like a $50 fee to get the transaction to process. That was just insane. And that was at Bitcoin, in the teens, say like 15 or 16,000. So that would be like $100 transaction equivalent right now. And we're talking, pennies to guarantee you're in the next block currently. So Bitcoin is still cheap. And of course, most small transactions have been migrating to the Lightning Network. If you don't use Lightning right now, you certainly will in the future. It's my firm belief that when people think of Bitcoin, they're not even going to think of on-chain. They're not going to think of Bitcoin Core. They're just going to think that using Lightning is using Bitcoin in the not very distant future at all. And of course, governments, federal reserve banks, huge corporations moving their treasuries around will do so on chain, but you and I won't even be worried about that. That transaction history, the transaction, the metric, the statistic that I like to follow, Bitcoin's 24-hour transaction rate is absolutely screaming. It is, last week we were looking at an average of 3.9 transactions per second, and that is up to 3.95 transactions per second this week. And as you know, I like to see anything above pi, 3.14. Anytime you see above 3.15 transactions per second, Bitcoin price is usually doing really well. That isn't any kind of official TA or any metric that I've heard anyone else endorse. But in the almost 2 years we've been doing this show, every time the on-chain transaction volume has been over 3.15 transactions per second, Bitcoin's price has been up. And it is, not necessarily week over week, but it's been up and to the right in general. It's certainly not crashing. All right. The last statistic I want to talk about is that mining difficulty adjustment that we mentioned a little while ago. As you know, Bitcoin's mining difficulty is adjusted every 2016 blocks, which is theoretically every 2 weeks. Currently, we're less than a day away from Bitcoin's next mining difficulty adjustment. We're 107 blocks away, so a little less than a day. That's going to be tomorrow, April 4th. And currently that's looking like it's going to be an increase of anywhere between 1.3 and 2.14%. And that is because blocks are currently averaging 9 minutes and 52 seconds. Bitcoin was written, the code was written for it to target an average of 10-minute block times. And anytime the average of 2016 blocks is faster than 10 minutes, the difficulty to mine a new block goes up. If it's longer than 10 minutes, the difficulty goes down. Currently, blocks are averaging 9 minutes and 52 seconds, so we're going to have a modest increase in mining difficulty, but that isn't too shabby considering what a couple weeks ago we had a 7.6% difficulty increase, a couple weeks before that a 10% difficulty increase, and the mining network is at all-time record high hash rate. The number of miners coming online continues to grow, although maybe it's plateauing out at the moment because well, of course, when the mining network is as huge as it is, even a 1% increase in the number of miners, I mean, there are mining farms out there with hundreds of thousands of ASICs in just one mining farm. So even if that mining farm were to just increase their capacity by 1%, 1% of 100 ASICs would be one new ASIC, 1,000 would be 10 new ASICs, 100,000 would be 100 new ASICs. So we're talking thousands and thousands of new ASICs that have been plugged in or upgraded to just ones that are more efficient and ones that are faster. Maybe we're just seeing the old Antminer S9s finally getting retired. Who knows? What I do know is that that Bitcoin's doing exactly what it's programmed to do, and it's going to increase difficulty around 1 to 2% to target those average 10-minute block times. TikTok next block. All right, real quick, thanks for those of you listening on your favorite podcasting 2.0 app, such as the Fountain app. We do not currently have any boosts to read unless one of you squeaked a Boostagram in right after I started recording or as I was setting up to record, because currently we don't have any boosts to read this week. But thanks to those of you who have boosted us in the past and those of you who are considering streaming us sats or boosting us as I speak. But most importantly, Podcasting 2.0 is just a better way to listen to your podcasts. Geographically, our audience distribution has not changed at all. It is exactly the same thing as it was last week, exactly the same for the third week in a row. 51% of you are listening from here in the United States. 13% of you are listening from Argentina. So hola, buenas noches to you in Argentina. 7% of you are listening from Deutschland, from Germany. Guten Abend, Deutschlanders. 3% of you are listening from Luxembourg, so Guten Abend as well. Luxembourg, you speak more than just German, but I don't, so sorry. 3% of you are listening from Colombia, so hola amigos in Colombia. 2% of you are listening from Canada. Hello, Canadians. Hello, our 51st state, we like to jokingly call you. Hello in the Great White North. 2% of you are listening from Spain. Hola. to those of you in Spain, 2% in Venezuela. Hola, amigos in Venezuela. 1% of you are listening from Sweden, and 1% of you are listening to us from the United Kingdom. So that's cool to know that we have an international audience out there. So hello, hola, guten Abend, etc. To all of you, if I missed your language, I apologize. Hey, send me a shout out, send me a DM on Twitter, send me an email or a boost letting me know what language you speak. And I will make it my duty to learn to say hello to you in that language, providing it's not something that I'm just incapable of comprehending, like Klingon. And I could probably even pull off Klingon, although I don't know Klingon. Sorry. All right, so the news. Uh, the biggest news every week recently has always seemed to have been the price, and the price is almost exactly where it was last week. I think I mentioned already that on April 1st, Elon Musk changed the Twitter logo to from the bird to the Doge logo, and I pulled up Twitter on well, on mobile it didn't change, but if you look at it on a computer, on a desktop or a laptop, you'll see the Doge in the upper left hand corner. And I pulled Twitter up a little while ago, right before I started recording, and the Doge was still popping up. And so apparently that pumped the price of Dogecoin by like 2 cents, which is a lot considering we're talking it was only trading for like 5 cents. And this isn't an altcoin, this isn't an S coin show, but Elon is really playing dangerously with the whole market manipulation thing. Is he still already in trouble for pumping Dogecoin once before? He needs to be careful. I know he thinks it's funny, and it is kind of funny. Elon's a troll, and I guess freedom of speech, you have the right to be a troll, right? But um, every time he does that, all those no coiners out there, all those crypto enthusiasts, all those S coiners, for some weird reason, think that their coin is going to be the next Bitcoin. And Dogecoin, if you know anything about Dogecoin, it was created as a joke, right? It was created to mock crypto. It was created with an infinitely expanding supply to purposely be worthless. And why anyone would pick that coin, other than the fact it's just like the smooth brain army doing it for fun, just as a joke, just for giggles. But there's people out there that saw the Doge logo and thought, oh, Elon's going to integrate Doge into Twitter, and that's going to pump the value of Twitter. Even if he does integrate Doge into Twitter, the coin is going to go, it's designed to go to zero. So stay away from shitcoins, guys. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money, but stay away from shitcoins. Also, the ultimate shitcoin out there, Elizabeth Warren, and this is almost a week ago that this happened. It was like the day after the last Bitcoin bulletin. So you've probably already seen her campaign ad where she was bragging. She's, quote, building an anti-crypto army. I have mixed thoughts on this because Bitcoin is for everybody, right? There's people on the left, people on the right that are into Bitcoin, that are Bitcoin maximalists. But increasingly in the United States, politicians are lining up. They're taking sides. They're taking either the pro-Bitcoin or the anti-Bitcoin position. And there's like nobody that's taking a neutral position. I mean, they're the whole let's give Bitcoin and crypto a sandbox. Let's not hamper development. Let's see what happens, and then tailor regulation down the road when whatever emerges. It seems to be evaporating, and it's lining up with more and more Democrats, members of the Democratic Party, ganging up on Bitcoin. This is going to backfire on them because I know a lot of people that consider themselves Democrats or consider themselves leftists that are into Bitcoin. And I always thought that Bitcoin is inherently a libertarian concept. I have a hard time squaring being a socialist or being a big government proponent and Bitcoin because Bitcoin takes away government's power, right? So I have a hard time squaring that circle. But nonetheless, I know plenty of people that consider themselves on the left or Democrats that are into Bitcoin. And this is alienating them. I know people that, like, for example, Ted Cruz has come out and endorsed Bitcoin, and Marco Rubio is pro Bitcoin. And I know people that absolutely cannot stand Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio. They hate him with a passion. They hate him as much as the Never Trumpers hate Donald Trump. It's just visceral. They will never like Ted Cruz. And the fact that he's pro Bitcoin and the fact he seems to understand Bitcoin, he seems to get it if you listen to what he has to say. Maybe it's BS. Maybe he's just saying what he thinks he needs to say to get elected in Texas. Who knows? But the point being, people like Ted Cruz are lining up on the side of Bitcoin, and people like Elizabeth Warren are squarely lining up against Bitcoin. And eventually, that's going to alienate some of their base, especially, Democrats traditionally rely on the youth vote, right? The young vote, the tech vote, the Silicon Valley vote. That tends to swing, that tends to break for the Democrats in elections here in the United States. And they're alienating some of it. And they don't need to alienate all of it. They just need to alienate a little bit of the vote. If 1 or 2% of the Silicon Valley tech types start saying, I'm not going to vote for you if you try and outlaw Bitcoin, or if you try and crush Bitcoin, even if they just stay home and don't vote for the Republican, that's enough to swing an election. We see elections decided by a couple thousand voters in Florida or Ohio or wherever, wherever the recount is going to be in the next major election. It might come down to 1,000 votes, and it might come down to 1,000 Bitcoiners who decided not to vote, or not to vote for a specific candidate because their stance on Bitcoin. So tread lightly, Liz. That's all I have to say. Personally, I think they ought to just stay out of it, but politicians like to grandstand, so politicians are going to politic, right? They say that politics is derived from the Latin word poly, meaning the many, and ticks, meaning blood-sucking insects, and that's certainly the case with Elizabeth Warren. On the positive news, yet another bank has come out, yet another industry has come out in favor of Bitcoin. The headline on CoinDesk today being Swiss government-owned bank PostFinance to offer crypto to customers. PostFinance will begin offering its 2.5 million customers access to buy, store, and sell Bitcoin and Ether, thanks to a partnership with Switzerland's Sygnum Bank. So while in the United States we're cracking down on Bitcoin, other countries are getting with the program. Switzerland is making it possible for you to buy and sell and store. Now, I have a problem with storing your Bitcoin on a bank, but normies are going to keep their money in the bank. So I encourage your friends and family to take custody, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. And just know, though, that a certain percent of the normies are always going to keep their money in the bank, whether it's Bitcoin or dollars or shiny yellow rocks. There's a lot of gold bugs out there that own paper gold. They don't actually own gold. They've never held gold in their hands. They just have a certificate for gold that's in a bank vault somewhere. So not your keys, not your coins, but this is the sort of adoption that is going to help onboard more people. And even if the normies are going to store their Bitcoin in a bank, at least it's helping Bitcoin adoption. And I have found that even if you are a newbie, you bought your first coin, you're storing on an exchange, you're storing it at a bank, your journey down the rabbit hole is just beginning. So most people, once they buy Bitcoin, you have an inherent interest in it. So you learn more, you read more, you do that 1,000 hours of research, oftentimes after you've made your first purchase. And that's when you come to understand that you need to take custody, and you start learning about hardware wallets. And maybe you buy a Ledger or a Trezor, and you take custody of your own Bitcoin, you put it in your own cold storage, and then you go further down the rabbit hole and you say, well, that's not even good enough, and you do multi-sig, or you upgrade to a cold card, or whatever. My point being, everybody's journey starts somewhere, and even if your journey starts with buying a Bitcoin and keeping it on an account with PostFinance in Switzerland, some of those people are going to take custody of their Bitcoin eventually, and even if they don't, as long as it's real Bitcoin and you don't have an FTX type Ponzi going on, that's going to increase adoption, and that's going to increase the price of Bitcoin. Because as you know, there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin, which works out to somewhere around 250,000 Satoshis per person in the world, which is why, right now, if you own one Bitcoin, that's only 28,000 US dollars of the Bitcoin. But one day, just 250,000 Satoshis will be the equivalent to an average person's share of the total global wealth. So get your Bitcoin, get it off of an exchange, but it's cool to see adoption. And speaking of adoption, Michael Saylor is stacking. Word came out that he had added previously in the last quarter, we found out that he had purchased more Bitcoin at like an average purchase price at $23,000 or something along those lines. But the headlines today, and this one from Market Insider on MSN, says, Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy adds to its Bitcoin trove, purchasing 1,045 coins for $24 million. The business software maker now holds 140,000 Bitcoin, and the value of that stash was nearly $4 billion, with Bitcoin trading above $28,000. It's amazing to think what the world's going to look like when the world's richest man is Michael Saylor, when the most powerful company in the world is MicroStrategy. He gets it. Hopefully you're adding to your stack. 140,000 Bitcoin's a lot of corn. I never have any dreams of holding that many coin. Hopefully most of you out there at least have the dreams or the means to become a whole coiner, because like I said, even 250,000 sats one day is going to be a significant chunk of change, in my humble opinion. All right, so on Twitter the other day, I saw an argument take place, and somebody had posted something about Bitcoin, and then a naysayer came on in the comments and said that Bitcoin will not be adopted because it takes 10 minutes, 20. I think it said 20 minutes to make your transaction, and it's going to cost you $5 to do it. And so somebody else replied with a snippet of them buying a cup of coffee, and the Lightning Network is instant and basically free. And their argument to that was, yeah, well, try teaching someone over 40 how to do that. Bitcoin basically can't succeed because nobody over 40 can grok the tech. I want to remind you that Adam Beck, one of the people cited in the white paper, one of the people often thought to possibly be Satoshi Nakamoto, is 52 years old. Al Finney would be 58 years old had he not died of ALS. Bitcoin was written not by boomers but by Gen Xers. To some extent, the older people always have a hard time adapting to new tech. But two things happen. A few years ago, your grandma would never have had an iPhone or a Galaxy, an Android phone or whatever. They probably had an old AARP flip phone with huge buttons and a giant screen, right? But now your grandma probably has an iPhone or probably has an Android. Eventually, it just gets adopted. Your grandma probably has email. Maybe she doesn't use Twitter, but that sooner or later, as tech becomes mainstream, even the old fogies, even the boomers start adopting it. But also, when any new technology comes out, it's always the young that adopt it first. There weren't 80 and 90-year-olds clamoring to climb onto a flying machine and learn to fly the right flyer when it first came out. But, everyone travels now, right? The kids that are born today will never know a world where Bitcoin didn't exist. They say that, and it's morbid to think of, but that technology advances or science advances one funeral at a time. So it's a stupid argument that nobody over 40 can grok the tech, because I know a lot of people over 40. The average listener to this podcast is over 40. Our demographics, I think, are like 40 to 55 for our average listener to this podcast. And I know a lot of the OGs. I know a lot of OG hackers, a lot of OG programmers, a lot of the OGs that are significantly over 40. And not only can they grok the tech, dude, they wrote the tech. So it's a stupid argument. Along those lines, uh, Satoshi Nakamoto, we obviously don't know who Satoshi is, but today is Satoshi Nakamoto's birthday. Satoshi chose April 5th, 1975 for his birthday, which means he's over 40 as well, right? And we don't know how old he is, but he probably didn't choose a birthday that was significantly older than he really was. And obviously it's probably a BS birthday because he's a pseudonym, right? But Satoshi chose the birthday April 5th, 1975. And he used that when he registered the pseudonym with the P2P Foundation. So that's why that's considered to be his birthday. But the reason he picked April 5th was because that's also the anniversary of that Executive Order 6102, where the United States made it illegal to hold gold. That executive order was signed by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, April 5th, 1933, 90 years ago today. And that executive order said that all persons are required to deliver on or before May 1st, 1993, all gold coin, bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them to a Federal Reserve Bank branch or agency or to any member bank of the Federal Reserve System. And it carried a criminal penalty for violation of the executive order of a $10,000 fine, which was a ton of money in 1933, more than a house. So we're talking, $1 million fine equivalent now, or 10 years in prison, or both, as provided in Section 9 of the order. So 90 years ago today, the United States government seized Americans' gold, made it illegal for you to hold gold. And why did they do it? They did it because they wanted to devalue the dollar. At the time, the dollar was backed by gold. We were on the gold standard. So they seized gold when it was worth something around $23 an ounce. And as soon as they had all the gold seized, the next thing they did was revalue the US dollar at with a gold basis, a base gold price of, I think it was $35 an ounce. So not quite doubling or cutting and not quite halving the value of the US dollar, but debasing the snot out of the US dollar. And for those of you who laugh at the United States for doing that, this wasn't necessarily unique to the United States. Other countries made it illegal to own gold as well. But beyond just making it illegal to own gold, uh, we were on a gold standard. So seizing gold was a form of currency controls, of capital controls to keep you. They were going to change the value of gold relative to the US dollar, making your US dollars worthless. But if you held gold, 1 ounce of gold was still going to buy what 1 ounce of gold was going to buy. It would just now take twice as many US dollars. So to keep people from bypassing that, to keep people from having an escape hatch, a lifeboat, so to speak, sound familiar? They confiscated their gold. But that's no different than any other capital control legislation or laws that were passed in places like Argentina, Venezuela, China, etc. Lebanon, places where they make it illegal to own like U.S. dollars, for example, because people were fleeing to the U.S. dollar because it was infinitely more stable than their local currency. And believe it or not, for those of you who think that, well, that was then and there's no way they could do that because that's completely unconstitutional, blah, 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 be informed that the Supreme Court of the United States did, in fact, uphold this as constitutional. They upheld every seizure, by the way, and this law remained in effect until it was repealed by President Gerald Ford in 1974, and it was finally legal for American citizens to own gold. There were 4 Supreme Court justices who dissented. They were labeled the 4 horsemen by the press, as in the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, as in they wanted to destroy the world, right? They're going to end the world. They're going to bring on the end of days, revelations. They're being biblical, like the destruction of the world, because these these justices were against basically the New Deal. If you know anything about history, you know that the New Deal and everything basically FDR did took what could have been just a simple recession and drug it out for a decade. And the United States, in many ways, is still suffering from the expansion of government, the erosion of freedoms, and the economic consequences of the New Deal. All right, and just to put a nightcap on that, Plan B had a interesting tweet just an hour or so ago where he said, to be crystal clear, 1933, illegal to own gold. 2023, illegal to own cash. Bitcoin is the best alternative. You might think that's far-fetched, but a CBDC is coming. And this has been happening, the move away from cash has been happening for most of my life. Every once in a while they come up with the whole, we need to get rid of the penny thing, or we need to get rid of the penny and the nickel thing, and they're trying to migrate us away from cash. But there are countries that are flat on moving away from cash completely. I believe Australia is in the process of just flat out banning cash and making all transactions electronic. And when they do, of course, you'll have no choice but to use the CBDC or Bitcoin. As Christine Lagarde said, it is your escape hatch. And that's why she wants to close the escape hatch. All right. I think there's something else I wanted to yammer on about, but I have already ranted enough, I think. And it's time to get down to why we're here. And that is to do our DCA stack, because today is DCA Wednesday, after all, right? And for those of you who don't know what DCA is, if you've never watched this podcast before, you never listened to this podcast before, DCA is short for dollar cost averaging. And dollar cost averaging is an investment strategy where you invest your money in equal portions at regular intervals, regardless of price. For example, this will be our 89th stack. We started stacking every Wednesday back on July 28th, 2021, so not quite 2 years ago. So our regular interval we chose is weekly. We chose weekly on Wednesdays. You do you. You could choose whatever interval you want. Some people choose daily. Some people DCA hourly. Most people that DCA in any investment do so on their payday. So if you get paid bi-weekly, your paycheck's every 2 weeks, maybe every 2 weeks is your DCA investment schedule. But that's your regular interval. And then the equal portion, we chose $20. And the reason we chose $20 is because I wanted to show 2 things. You're not too late. Even investing as little as $20 will eventually build up a respectable stack of Satoshis. And along those lines, if you are in a place where $20 is a lot of money, you're not left out. You have the opportunity to build a sizable stack of sats before hyper-Bitcoinization, even if all you can come up with is $20 a week. So you do you, pick your price, pick your equal portion, pick your regular interval, and that is what DCA is. And by stacking those 88 times, we've managed to build a stack of 6,107,419 sats. We did that just $20 at a time. And we're going to grow that stack again today. And to do so, we're going to use the handy dandy Cash App. I've been using Cash App for this entire podcast. And the reason I use Cash App, I'm hearing a really weird, not a reverb. Hopefully, every time I talk, it must be the noise canceling on this soundboard. Every time I talk, I hear like a hiss, and then it goes away when I pause. Hopefully, you're not hearing it because I'm using the denoise setting on the soundboard instead of using Adobe to clean the audio up later, which is stupid. I should be recording dirty audio and cleaning it up in Adobe because it's a lot harder to clean it up once you have applied denoise to it on the soundboard. And the reason why is because, for example, that sound, I only hear it when I'm talking, and when I stop, it goes away. So one of the ways to clean up audio in Adobe is you take a place where there's a pause, and if there's like a noise in the background, and you're not talking, you sample that noise, and then you just tell it to remove that frequency from the entire rip. And you can't do that if that noise is only occurring when I'm talking, because it's almost impossible to isolate. Anyway, hopefully the audio quality doesn't suck. If it does, I will have learned a valuable lesson, and I will do things different next week. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm going to stack using the Cash App. There are multiple reasons for that, but not the least of which is that Cash App will let me send money to my Cash App account instantly, purchase Bitcoin with it instantly, and transfer it to my hardware wallet instantly. They're not necessarily the cheapest service out there. They charge about 2.25% fee. I've tried a couple other exchanges and apps, and they're not the cheapest, they're not the most expensive. But when you're making a $20 purchase, it really doesn't matter. We're going to spend 45 cents in fees to make this purchase, and if you were using an exchange that charges you 0.5% or 0.1%, which is significantly less in fees, they're going to charge you a mining fee to send the Bitcoin to your hardware wallet, and that might be $1. So it'll certainly be the 45 cents or enough of the 45 cents to make it the difference moot. So we're going to use Cash App, but again, you, as always, you do you. Pick an app or an exchange that fits your needs. If you choose to use Cash App, however, there is a referral code in the show notes, and if you click on that referral code when you sign up, you'll get $5 free for doing so, and you'll be tipping the podcast $5 as well. So thank you in advance if you do that. There are other referral codes in there, like I think we have a referral code for Strike and a referral code for the Fold app as well. So if you are considering using any of those services, please use the referral code in the show notes, and you'll get something free for doing so. I think you'll get $10 if you use the referral code for Strike, and you'll get 20,000 free sats if you sign up with Fold with our referral link. All right, so I've added the $20, tapping buy Bitcoin, tapping confirm, and boom, just like that, we purchased another 69,496 Satoshis. And that is going to bring our stack up to 6,176,915 sats. And perhaps more importantly, that actually decreased our average purchase price a tiny bit. Last week was the first time in a long time that the purchase actually increased our average cost basis. Last week, it increased our average purchase price by $2.38. This week, it knocked it down by 44 cents. So that's cool. In addition to growing the size of the stack, we reduced our average purchase price, which basically really only matters if you're in a country where you have to pay capital gains tax, like the United States. So right now, for example, we've purchased at an average purchase price of $28,816.97. So any time Bitcoin is above that, we are in the profit. So let's say we sold our Bitcoin at a price of $30,000, we'd have about a $1,200 capital gain. And that's why that matters. Most importantly, Bitcoin is still cheap. We're still getting 69,000 sats, almost 70,000 sats for our purchase. If you hearken all the way back to when Bitcoin was at its all-time high, the most expensive we purchased Bitcoin for was in October of 2021, and we bought it $65,969. So not quite 69,000, but pretty darn close. And that only got us 29,000 sats. So we got almost 70,000 sats today. And as long as Bitcoin stays on sale, all that should matter to you is the size of your stack and the amount of sats you're getting for each cuck buck you convert. And that's going to start dwindling, especially when we get to that halving in about a year. You're going to see the number of sats that you score Well, when Bitcoin retakes its all-time high, you're only going to get 29,000 sats for your $20 investment. And then when Bitcoin hits 100,000, maybe 25,000 sats, and it's going to go down from there forever, Laura, forever. All right, well, that's all I really wanted to talk about. I did have a pet peeve I wanted to get into, and I'm going to do an entire episode reviewing the Fold card and the Fold app because you hear a lot of podcasters talk about the Fold card. It's basically like Cash App, but instead of being able to send money around to people, you get a debit card. You load that debit card up, and you use it for your daily expenses, and you get Bitcoin back anywhere between 1% or whatever. They've got a little spinny wheel, and sometimes you don't get any sats back. You get whatever the reward are. Sometimes you get like 3% back. And I've been playing around with it, and I've gotten a decent number of sats back for spending just a couple $100. I also tried them out for a Bitcoin purchase. I bought like $60 or $80 of the Bitcoin on it. And I went to transfer it to my hardware wallet on Thursday. So last Thursday, almost a week ago. And it said pending, even last night. I had sent an email to their tech support and thinking maybe it was just hung up. There was a problem with my transaction, right? And wrong. I was told that basically they're just so busy. What the email said effectively is that they have to manually approve all transfers. So mine finally did go through this afternoon, like 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday. So just shy of a week to transfer my Bitcoin, which is completely unacceptable. They did say they're in the process of developing a new wallet. They didn't say when they're going to launch that. So I will reserve judgment for Fold. We'll call this a one-off for right now. But if you are using Fold for your daily purchases to stack sats, be advised it might take you a week or so to get those sats to an exchange. So, or to get those sats to your off of their custody, out of an exchange to your hardware wallet. So if you have sats you've been saving on the Fold app, move them off now, because I have no reason to think anything will happen to Fold, but they do use Prime Trust to handle their Bitcoin transactions, and there's been some stuff about Prime Trust in the news recently. So even with the Fold app, which is something I'm still using, something I'm testing out, something I'm not recommending, I'm not poo-pooing Fold card. Any service, get your sats off, including Fold. If you're at the minimum withdrawal threshold, get them off Fold, because if something happens to Prime Trust, if something happens to Fold, it could take a week to transfer those sats. So get your sats off any exchange. I'm not picking on Fold. I just have an anecdote because I just used Fold. Well, I used it a week ago, but I just now got my sats. All right, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about this week. I do want to remind you to please follow us on Twitter. The podcast Twitter account is at BTC Bulletin Pod. The more people that follow us, the more people will see it in their feeds, the more people will hopefully help Orange Pill, the more people will be exposed to this podcast. If you don't use Twitter and you want to reach out to us, you can email me. Our email is bitcoinbulletin@protonmail.com. Again, that's bitcoinbulletin@protonmail.com. But please reach out. Give us your opinion. Let us know what you like about the podcast. Let us know what you don't like about the podcast. Do you like this new set? If you're watching the video version of the podcast, last week was the first time I used this new set. Previously, I had been, recording in front of a green screen and just putting a nice photo from someplace I'd been or whatever up as the background. So I'd like feedback. Do you like this better, or would you rather see a neat, pretty picture behind me, or should I mix it up? Let me know on Twitter, or let me know by sending me an email. Again, we're at BTC Bulletin Pod or bitcoinbulletin@protonmail.com. Of course, if you're listening on Fountain, you can always send us a boost, right? If you like sending us a tip, since the boost is a lightning boost, it comes with a message. And of course, as tradition, we will read that message on the following episode of the Bitcoin Bulletin podcast. If you do, unless you tell us, please don't read this message. But any boostergram is appended to the show notes on Fountain. So, or it's pinned to the show on Fountain. So they're all public anyway. All right. With that said, thank you for listening. If you are listening on Spotify, there is a video version of this podcast available. I started migrating all our videos to YouTube. We barely have any subscribers on YouTube because I hadn't really been using it. But one of my friends said he couldn't see the video on Spotify because he doesn't have a paid Spotify account. I don't have a paid Spotify account, and I can see it, but I have a free Spotify account, so maybe that's it. But either way, if you want to watch the video, you can do so on either Spotify or our YouTube. And the links to those are in the show notes as well. But again, don't forget to join us this Wednesday next Wednesday and every Wednesday while we grow our stack and continue to test out the dollar cost averaging hypothesis. But until then, keep on stacking those sats, you sexy sat stackers.